Welcome back to another Reaper blog tutorial. This is what's new in Reaper 7.02. In addition to covering some of these new features, we're also going to catch up on a few things that didn't fit into the what's new in Reaper 7.0 video. Let's have a look. Up first, we're going to look at some things related to creating folders and managing folders. Make folder creation drag and drop behavior closer to that of 6.81. If inserting track at the end of project and the last track is a folder with hidden collapsed children, add the tracks outside the folder. Add actions and menu items to move tracks to new or existing folder track. So creating a folder, I went over this in version 7.0 what's new video. But yeah, it's changed again, and it may change again in the future. But mainly, I think we're going to stick with this, this folder icon. When you're dragging a track to another track, just look for this folder icon. For a little bit, it was when you're hover over sort of the left third of a track, but now it's more or less the middle. Anywhere here within the middle of a track, too high and it moves it, too low and it moves it. But right here in the middle, that's going to create a folder. Let's add a few more tracks. Name this track. So let's say drums. And let's say we've got a couple tracks here that we want to move into the drums folder. Right click, move tracks to folder, and then we can select drums from this list. Track 4 here is my last in the folder, and I want to make a new track, and I use my shortcut to make a new track. It's going to come out of the folder. Yeah, so even if there's no other tracks after it, if I make another track, a new track is always going to be created outside of the folder. If we have this option for folder collapse button cycles track heights, normal, small, collapsed, normal, small, hidden, normal, collapsed, normal, hidden, these are all added in Reaper 7.0. I'm just going to change this to normal, small, and hidden as my option. So if I press this button again, they're going to be smaller tracks. One more time, now they're hidden tracks. And again, track 1 is my folder track, but all the children tracks are hidden. If I add a new track, it's going to be, again, outside of that folder. So you're never adding new tracks to hidden tracks with folders. Nice to have, because that would sometimes happen. And coming back to that menu option for moving tracks to folder, one other thing to look for is search for move folder. There's this action, move tracks to folder, or move tracks to new folder. These can be set as actions. You can assign a keyboard shortcut to that. I'm just going to bring this one out of the folder and run this action. And there's going to be a little pop-up right where your mouse was, new folder track or existing folder. Click on that, and there it is. And I think that's it for moving tracks and folders. Fixed item lanes. Add lane collapse button, right-click menu, to disable and re-enable fixed lanes. Add track setting to show hide lane buttons, right-click or alt-click lane collapse button. When record into first available lane is enabled, skip comping lanes, if any. In the preferences, support setting track lane buttons hidden by default. So if we go to a track that has fixed item lanes and right-click, there's now an option to disable fixed item lanes or re-enable it. And also an option to hide the fixed lane buttons, which compacts that column quite small. And we can also use the alt-click shortcut, and that will hide those icons. And also shift-click should switch between seeing all the lanes or a single lane. In the preferences, we can switch between which is our default for single-click or shift-click. Under preferences, track send defaults, we can enable fixed item lanes on by default. We can also set fixed lane defaults, including hiding the lane buttons by default. So if you want to have fixed item lanes enabled, but you don't want it to take up too much space, you can enable the hide lane buttons if you want to do a few takes before actually doing the comping. So you can use that. For toolbars, add preference to disable all toolbar animations. So in the last video, I showed you this option for don't animate armed action toolbar buttons. And I showed how to disable the animations for these toolbar buttons, these toggled toolbar buttons. So armed toolbar button, not animated. But we can actually check this box here, don't animate any toolbar buttons, and that will disable this animation here if you find that to be distracting. There's a few features related to MIDI that I didn't have time to cover in the last video, so we're going to cover them here. Support up to 128 MIDI buses per track. Add action to send explicit note-off messages for every channel pitch combination to every MIDI output and plugin. They've improved the MIDI devices preferences page, also supporting 128 input and output devices. Create multiple native MIDI loopback devices, and per device option to not warn when unable to open a device. So let's start this off by looking at the new MIDI devices page. So we go to Preferences, Audio, MIDI Devices, and now instead of a list, we've got a grid that can be sorted by device status input if this device is available in the All MIDI Inputs section of the track inputs, and if the device is enabled for control, or by the device ID. We can click within the grid here to add that device as an input, as a controller input, if it appears in the All MIDI Devices Input section of the track input. We can also right-click on any device, choose Do Not Warn if unable to open device. If the name is long, we can abbreviate long device names. There we go. Pretty nice. We can also add in a virtual MIDI device. So I'm just going to click on this Add Virtual MIDI, add Loopback MIDI device. And now that should be called REAPER Loopback 1. We'll just double click on this to show the properties. Hit OK. And then scroll down in the output section. Should be the same thing. Let's sort by, there it is, REAPER Loopback 1. It's enabled. You can see all the settings here. And then OK. And apply and OK. That input will appear here on this track. We've got REAPER Loopback 1. And if we are sending out MIDI, we would do that on the MIDI hardware output section, and we can see REAPER Loopback 1. There's not really any options for this other than sending to specific channels, but it's like that with any hardware MIDI device. And that should also be available in Reinsert. Under MIDI, REAPER Loopback is here as well. For the 128 channels of MIDI, that's going to be a right-click on any virtual instrument pin connector here, and go to MIDI input, and then there's the different buses, 1 through 16 like we're used to seeing, and then all the way up to 128. And the same for MIDI output. Most users don't use this stuff, but if you're curious what that meant, that's where that is. That's how you use it. There's a few situations where you might be able to trigger a stuck note. I held the key and then I turned off the track record arm. So we're still hearing this synth, even though I'm not pressing the note anymore, because it didn't receive a note off. Pretty annoying. But there is this shortcut, and I've got this on Control Escape. Send all notes off and all sounds off to MIDI outputs plugins. I'm going to run this, and then all sound stops. All MIDI devices and all plugins should stop and not send any output until we start it again. And just starting and stopping playback should fix any stuck notes as well. Some certain more stubborn plugins or with hardware devices, they may not reset, but that's sort of just a quick shortcut you can use to send a note off to everything. On the topic of effects containers, there's actually a feature that I didn't really show. I think I mentioned it in the changelog section. Containers can have a feedback loop, which is pretty neat. So I'll show you that now. So I've got a synth here, and let's add in a container. Inside the container, I'll add in some effects. So I'll add in one of my favorite delay plugins. I'm just going to set this mix to 100% wet. Then I'm going to add in a pitch plugin. I'll just grab another one from the same company, Little Alter Boy. And then I'm going to add in re-EQ to this track and put it inside of the container. And I'm just going to filter the very highs and lows, and just to make sure that this gives us a volume control here, because feedback loops can get very loud. So here's how the effects chain sounds right now. Okay, so actually, one other thing, I want to turn the feedback down. So this entire container has this long delay, 1/8 note delay. We're going to set this to maybe 50% wet on the container. So it's delayed, and then it's pitched up, and then there's just some filtering to tame the feedback. We can take any plugin within the container and go to the plugin pin connector. So that's just a left click there. And under feedback channels, we're going to set this to 2. So stereo in and out, the last plugin in the chain sends back to the beginning of the container. And so if we play this now, it'll be quite a bit different. We get more echoes. And the louder this is on our last plugin, and the more similar to the input and output, the more feedback we're going to get. So yeah, pretty neat. That's the thing you can do with containers. There's other ways to make feedback loops in Reaper, but this is now one of the most convenient ways to do it, and you can get some pretty wild effects. For video, an option to disable video per media item. Video media defaults to low-resolution audio peaks for improved responsiveness. Optionally display video from background projects if current project lacks video. Use project time offsets to synchronize video and playback between project tabs. If equals ref markers specified in both projects, use as a manual synchronization point. I really like this change that they've done here in the preferences for video. Display low-resolution audio peaks for video items. Video is a compressed file, and the peak files can be kind of hard on the system to read. And most of the time, you're processing your audio on a separate track anyhow, so the waveforms are not perfectly accurate, but there's no lag with zoom, as you can see here. Smoothly zooms in and out, no issues. Right-click, go to Source Properties, and in here, we've got the option to use low-res peaks enabled by default, high-res peaks, or disable audio. I'm using this disable audio option in most video files that I work with. But this is new. In addition to all the flip options and rotating options, there's also the option of disabling the video. So no video plays out of this file. Let's add another project. So we've got 2 project tabs here. On the second project tab, if I right-click on the tab and go to Run Background Projects, I can also enable this option to display video from background projects if active project lacks video. And we can also synchronize start times, lots of good stuff. I'll load my screen set. And so even though this project is empty, you can see my recording from the other day is in this session. So if you're working with sub-projects, doing complex sound design work, maybe just focused on one element of something in a redesign, and you're using sub-projects for different categories of sound work, rather than having to copy the video file into each sub-project so you can see it, you can now play out of the main project. If your source start time is not the same as project start bar 0, you can use this reference marker. So let's say at bar 13, I'll add in a marker here, equals REF. And in bar, let's say bar 3 is T equals REF. So this should line up here. So my bar 13 in project 2 is the same as bar 3 in my project 1. So that's a good way to synchronize things just by using markers. So that's it for what's new in Reaper 7.02. There's more things in the changelog, but these are the most important things, plus catching up on some additional things from the 7.0 update. So I hope you liked the video, and if you missed any of the other videos in this series, you can go all the way back to Reaper 5.0, watch all the tutorials in that series. There's a link down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Support the Reaper blog through Patreon. Visit reaper.blog for more tutorials.